Once your custom public functions have been defined in a Visual Basic module, such as the MyFunctions module we created in the last movie, you can make use of them throughout your database. Let's take a look at a couple of examples. First, let's make use of that age function that we defined. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and create a new query. I'll go to the Create tab and choose Query Design. I'm going to choose to pull in some information from my employees table. So I'll select that from the Show Table window and say Add, and then Close to get rid of the Show Table window. Now here we can use our age function to determine how long each employee has been with the company. For instance, we have this hire date here. And technically we're not calculating their age, we're calculating the number of years that they've been with the company. So let's go ahead and create a query that displays this. First, I'll add my first name and last name of each of my employees. Then I'll add in the hire date. In the fourth column, I'm going to right-click and choose Build to open up the Expression Builder. Here, we're going to calculate the employee's tenure. The name of the column will be tenure with a colon. Next, we're going to make use of that function that we created in the last movie. So I'll go into the Functions category here, but instead of going into Built-in Functions, I'm going to go into the Kinetico Custom Functions. Inside of there, we'll see a category of MyFunctions, which corresponds to the name of the module we created. And inside of that module, we have the two functions that we created, age and square meter. Let's go ahead and double-click on age. I'm going to come up here to the top, and I'm going to get rid of this text that came along that says EXPR. We already defined the expression header right here. So let's get rid of that. That leaves us with the age function that requests some information called DOB, or date of birth. Now, instead of the birth date, we're going to supply the hire date of our employees. So I'll click on this DOB field. I'll close my function group here, and I'll drill into the database, into the tables, and into the employees table. Here, I'll double-click on hire date to add that reference up here to my function. Let's go ahead and say OK to apply that into my field. Now let's create another field that calculates when the employee's next anniversary date is. We'll go into the next column and choose Build. Here we'll type in the column header of anniversary with a colon, and then we'll type in a function called dateAdd. DateAdd will return a variant of type date containing a date to which a specified time interval has been added. In other words, we're going to take the hire date, we're going to add in the tenure, and we're going to define when the next anniversary date for each employee is. I'm going to open up a parentheses, and it asks me for the interval. In this case, we want to add years. So in quotation marks, I'll type in 4Ys. I'll go ahead and type a comma to get to the next section, which is the number. How many years do we want to add? In this case, I want to add the number of years that we've calculated as our tenure. So I'll type in the word tenure. Now in this case, we actually want the tenure plus 1 year. Now if I only add the number of years that this employee has been with the company, I'm actually going to get the last anniversary. I want the next anniversary, so I'm going to add 1 to the tenure. I'll type in a comma, and the date we want to start with is the hire date. So I'll go ahead and type in hire date. I'll type a closing parentheses to finish off the function, and go ahead and say OK to add that into my query grid. Let's go ahead and run it and see how it works. Now I can see the first name and last name of each of my employees. I can see what day they were hired. I can see how many years they've been with the company. And I can see the date of their next anniversary. Let's go ahead and save this query. I'll press the save icon up here on the top, and I'll call it Employee Anniversary. We'll go ahead and say OK to save that query, and I can close it out. So that's how you use a public function inside of a query. Let's take a look at another example of where we can use our public functions. In this case, I'm going to go into the products form. Here's where we have our footprint listed as square feet. I'm going to go ahead and add in the calculation that'll also convert it to square meters. We'll right-click and go into Design View. I'm going to add in a new text box by clicking on the text box control up here, and I'm just going to add it into my form. We can move it into position later. Let's go ahead and change this text field here on the left that says square meter. Now inside of this text box, we're going to put in a calculation. So I'm going to go to the Data tab, and on the control source, we're going to click on Build. In this case, we're going to use the function that we built earlier. So I'll go into my Functions, Kinetico Custom Functions, the MyFunctions group, and I'll double-click on square meter. The square meter function needs to apply it to the square footage, and we can find that in a field called footprint. So I'll go ahead and type in footprint. We'll go ahead and say OK, and that'll apply that function into this control source. Let's go ahead and move this into position. I'll go ahead and drop it right below footprint here. And maybe I'll move the bottom of my form down just as much. Okay, let's go ahead and do one more thing. Because we don't want to edit this information in the square meter calculation, we only want to display it. We're going to go over here into the enabled property here and change it from yes to no. That way the user can't change any of that data. Let's go ahead and view our form here. And now I'm just going to click on a product here that has a square footage listed in the footprint. For instance, this solar panel has a square footage of 13.4 feet, which translates into 1.2 meters. So those are a couple of ways that we can bring our custom functions into the database. We can either use a query or build them directly into the forms and reports. Custom functions allow you to save complex calculations in easy-to-remember functions so they can be applied consistently throughout the database.